All right, Rabbi, say good. Higdam slichas. Is that the question? Slichas? Yeah, or anything and everything. Yeah. All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Maseches Megillah. Let us begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves. To thank Yoel Sara Kelman for dedicating all the shiurim and drashos this month in honor of the birth of their daughter, Oriya Tahel, and in the hope that in the merit of all the tefilos of those davening for children will soon be answered. To thank Teri Czinn for dedicating all the shiurim and drashos this month in honor of their grandchildren, Adin, Tzvi, and Naftali, Moshe. To thank Shirley Elbaum Family for dedicating all the Shirley and Joshua's commemoration of the yahrzeit of Shirley's husband, Gerald Elbaum, Yaakov Kopel, R Avraham Menachem. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating the Week of Learning in memory of Paul's sister Leah Bas Shmuel in commemoration of her yahrzeit on the 11th of Teves. And to thank David and Malki Kramer for dedicating today's shir in honor of the beautiful Chevra, who is part of this shir in Emeretz Hashem in the Schus, that we will be zoche to celebrate many siyumim and many haschalos of Masechtos together in the years to come. And I'll say with that, let us begin in an incredible simcha today. To begin to be able to learn Maseches Megillah together. But also, I'll just point out something really amazing. You know, today, of course, is Asara B'Teves. And it's interesting that we are beginning a new Masechta of Maseches Megillah on Asara B'Teves. What happened on Asara B'Teves? So the primary event which occurred on Asara B'Teves is that Nebuchadnezzar and his armies laid siege to Yerushalayim. That's really what happened on Asara B'Teves, the siege around Yerushalayim on Asara B'Teves. And I will say what's interesting to note is as follows, is that at the end of the day, if you think about it, we have so many other fast days related to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. We have the 17th of Tammuz or the 9th of Tammuz, depending, first Beis HaMikdash, second Beis HaMikdash, the walls were breached. We have Tisha B'Av, right? Beis HaMikdash, Rahman al-Islam, was destroyed. So why do you have to have another fast on the 10th of Teves for the beginning of the siege? So Rabbi said the answer to that is actually we just learned it in Maseches Tainus. You remember again, the Gemara asked if the Beis HaMikdash was set ablaze in the afternoon of the 9th and primarily burnt until the 10th. The fast day should have really been when? On the 10th. So why do we fast on the 9th? Well, remember the refrain of the Gemara? Aschalta de paranusa adifa. That sometimes the time to mourn and the time to really reflect on what's gone wrong is when things begin to unravel. That's because at the beginning is when you really have to pay attention, because sometimes if you pay attention at the beginning of when things unravel, you could potentially still save the day. You could potentially still turn things around. Aschalta de paranusa adifa. And I was thinking as I was preparing the shir, that if aschalta de paranusa adifa, if the beginning of terrible things is considered to be significant, then alachas kama v'kama aschalta de simcha adifa as well. That how precious and how beautiful and how important the beginning of joyous events are. Because also remember again, Mida Tova, the good is always more impactful and more abundant than the negative. So if aschalta de paranusa adifa, if the beginning of calamitous, difficult events is significant, then al-achas, like Asara B'Teves, that's today. Aschalta de paranusa adifa. This was the beginning of the end. We could have turned it around today. We still could have turned it around today. But aschalta de paranusa, we fast on Asara B'Teves to remember the beginning of everything that unraveled. Then al-achas kama v'kama, all the more so when you start something beautiful, how precious and how meaningful that beginning is. We'll say it's the beginning of a new Masechta. Right? You feel it. You feel there's something different in the air. It's like a shtikol Rosh Hashanah, right? It's like Chodesh Elul. There's like something new that's happening. Aschalta de Masechta Adifa. You know what happens at the beginning of a new Masechta? You know what happens? There's that new Masechta smell. I'm all excited. This is it. This is going to be my Masechta. I'm going to be present. There's no days off, right? I'm in this. I'm chazering. I'm this, that. And then what happens? You know, whenever you get a couple of days in, there's one long night, or there's this, or there's that. I will say, the whole chap is, let's hold on to this. It's a short Masechta. It really is a very short Masechta, and I think most of us have probably seen Megillah in one form or another over the course of our Talmudic studies. And all the more so, by the way, we're going to see some beautiful Gemara related to Purim. We have a chance of going into Purim really, really prepared for the Yom Tov, both in understanding of the Megillah and the halachas of the Yom Tov. Aschalta de Masechta Adifa. Let's make our commitment today. Let's concretize that commitment today. Let's be all in as of today. And if we begin in the right way, there's no telling what we could accomplish. And also with that, let us begin. Maseches Megillah Daf Beis Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah. Very, very, very exciting. Says the Mishnah, Megillah Nikreis Biyud Aleph, Biyud Beis, Biyud Gimel, Biyud Aleph, B'Tesvav. Megillah could technically be read from on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th of Adar. Now, I will say, obviously, the Mishnah does not mean to say that I'm reading the Megillah on all of these days, but rather these are all the possible days. We'll see again, depending on circumstances, on which Megillah could be read. Lo pachos velo yoser, no less and no more. In other words, Megillah can never be read earlier than the 11th, nor could it be ever read later than the 15th. Okay, and we'll analyze that. So, walled cities. Now, I'll say wall as of when? Cities that are walled as of the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, meaning from the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, Korim B'Tesvav. They go ahead and they read on the 15th of Adar. Now, we'll discuss where all of this comes from. But again, so for halacha number one is that the potential range of dates for Kriyas HaMegillah is from the 11th through the 15th. That's number one. Number two, walled cities will read on the 15th of Adar. Kfarim. Both say now, Kfarim are villages, Ayaros Gidolos, large cities. So the common denominator between Kfarim, villages, and Ayaros Gidolos is what? They are unwalled. So these are unwalled cities. What's the halacha? Korn b'yodalid. They read on the 14th. So both say, third important halacha. Unwalled cities, whether they're unwalled that they're large cities or small villages, will read on the 14th of Adar. Rabbi say, however, villages will be different. How are villages different? Ella shakfarim makdimin liyom haknisa. Rabbi say, but the only difference is that villages have the ability to advance their reading to the Yom HaKnisa. Yom HaKnisa literally means the entry day. Now look at Rashi for just a moment. This is incredible. Rashi says over here, Rashi says, Rashi is on both sides of both columns over here today. A lot to say on today's daf. So Rashi says, listen to this. Kilomar, mukafin korin b'tesvav, v'she'in mukafin korin b'yudalid, hariakol bichlal, suhechin mishkachos, yud aleph, yud beis, yud gimel. Now I will say, remember again, as you read the Mishnah, you have a simple fundamental shaila, which is as follows. If we go ahead and we say, unwalled cities and villages read on the 14th, walled cities read on the 15th, okay, that seems to be the end of the discussion. What's the problem? The Mishnah said the possible dates of Kriyas HaMegillah are 11, 12, 13. So how do 11, 12, and 13 ever come up? So Rashi says, I'll tell you how. Mishkachos, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Elo, Shakforim. Nosnu lahem chachamim roshos lahaktim kriasam liyom haknisa. The Chazal gave the villages the ability to advance their reading to the nearest Yom HaKnisa, entry day. We'll see what that means in just a moment. Yom Sheni b'Shabbos shelifnei Yodalit, o Chamishi b'Shabbos sheyom Knisa, shakfarim miskansin la'ayaros l'mishpat. So we'll say, listen to this. Now we're going to see actually two different versions of this. Right now, we're assuming Yom HaKnisa means as follows. Villagers would come into large cities on Mondays and Thursdays. Mondays or Thursdays. Why Mondays or Thursdays? Those were the days in which Batei Din were in session. So if you had a particular situation to adjudicate, right, you had a particular issue, you would come into the larger cities on Mondays and Thursdays. We're going to see also, there may be other reasons, commerce reasons, that they were coming into larger cities on Mondays and Thursdays. But the point over here is that villagers were often coming into larger cities on Mondays and Thursdays. Now watch this. The Fishe Batei Din, I'm reading Rashi still, because again, Jewish courts, Batei Din, are in session on Mondays and Thursdays. Kitakanas Ezra. Rabbi said that was a takana of Ezra, right? An enactment of Ezra Hanavi that Batei Din should be in session on Mondays and Thursdays. So Rabbi says, now watch this. Vakforim einon bikiin likros utzrichin shiyikra'ena lahem echad mibnei ha'ir. V'letrichom chachamim lehis acher v'lavo b'yom yodalru upam shir. I suppose to this. So let's bring this all together. Villages often lacked a balkore. They lacked a balkore. Or maybe if they had a balkore, villages sometimes lacked a minyan. So what Chazal allowed the villages to do was as follows, was to go ahead and come into the larger cities on the closest Monday or Thursday to the 14th. Again, we'll see all the variations. And they could discharge their obligation of Kriyas HaMegillah on that nearest Monday or Thursday. In other words, I will say, Chazal did not force them to make the trip into the large cities on the 14th itself. We'll see why. Why can't they just come into the large city on 14th? We'll see why that is. But Allah Alamaisa will say this is where 11, 12, and 13 come up. Because depending on how the 14th falls out, villages have the right to advance their Megillah reading to the closest Monday or Thursday. Since they have to come in anyway to the large cities, they could chaparain and they could go ahead and get a Kriyas HaMegillah then as well. Quite amazing. So the Gemara says, Ketzad. So I say, now, interestingly enough, the Mishnah is going to go through all the variations. So Ketzad, here we go. Chalios Yodalad B'Sheni. So I'll say, let's take an easy case. 14th of Adar falls out on a Monday. Simple, straightforward case. 14th of Adar falls out on a Monday. We'll say, what happens? Kfarim. This is an easy one. Why is this an easy one? Because when the 14th falls out on a Monday, then what? All unwalled cities are reading at the same time, right? So whether you are a large city or whether you are a village, since it's a Monday, everyone's reading on the same time, on the same day. So Kfarim Ayaras goes Karim Babayom, Mukafes Chomel Machar, walled cities will read the next day. What's the next day? The 15th, right? 15th. So that's case number one. Good, start a little easy. What happens if the 14th falls out on a Tuesday or a Wednesday? So in that case, so we'll say, so remember again, if it falls on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, so villages could read the previous Monday, right? They read the previous Monday. So now you begin to see, what? 12 and 13. 12 and 13. Vayaros Kidolos Korim Bobayom. But I remember again, large unwalled cities will always read on the 14th. Well, we'll see, except when they don't, right? But the idea is that Allah Alamaisa, obviously the unwalled cities are never really advancing to any previous Monday or Thursday. So unwalled cities will read on that day. Umukafas Chomel Machar, and walled cities will read the next day. Beautiful. Chalios Pechamishi. Similarly, again, we'll say, what happens if the 14th falls out on a Thursday? Once again, Kfarim Va'yaros Gidolos Korim Bo Bayom. So we'll say in this case again, unwalled cities, large unwalled cities and villages will read on that day, because again it's a Thursday, so it's an entry day anyway. Everyone can read on a Thursday. Umukefes Choma Lemachar, and ultimately again, walled cities the next day, the 15th, which is Friday. Chalios Erev Shabbos. So we'll say here we get to an interesting case. What happens if the 14th falls out on a Friday? 14th falls out Friday the 14th. What happens? Kfarim, Makdim Liyamaknisa. So we'll say villages will advance their reading to when? Thursday. Va'ayoros Gidolos Umukafos Choma Korin Bobayom. Now we'll say here's what's interesting. In this case, where the 14th falls out on a Friday, in which case again the 15th will fall out on Shabbos. Rashi points out over here that we do not read the Megillah on Shabbos. This is under the umbrella of what we call Gzeira Dirabah. Same reason we don't blow shofar on Shabbos. Shema Ya'avirenu Dalit Amos Birshus Harabim. Lest one come to carry a Megillah to a Baal Koreh, right? I don't know how to read the Megillah myself. I'm going to carry it to a Baal Koreh. I'm going to end up carrying it Dalit Amos, which is an Isser D'Oraisa. So Rabbi said, therefore, we don't read Megillah on Shabbos. Therefore, watch this. When the 15th falls down on Shabbos, something very interesting happens, which is the Mukafos Choma go ahead and move back their reading of the Megillah to Friday. So it'll turn out that both unwalled cities and walled cities will both be reading on Friday. I both say, why not just push it to Sunday? Because remember again, as the Mishnah said, 15th is the latest date. We don't read the Megillah past the 15th, and Sunday is already the 16th. Incredible. So the Gemara Mishnah says, so Chalil Sarv Shabbos, Kfarim Akdimim Aknisa, so villages will read Thursday. Ayoros Gidolos, Umukafos Choma Borim Bo Bayom. So large cities, right, large unwalled cities, as well as walled cities, will read on that Friday, the 14th. Right, good. Chalios B'Shabbos. But it's another interesting case. What happens if the 14th falls out on Shabbos? 14th falls out on Shabbos. Kfarim Va'ayoros Gidolos Makdimim V'Karlim Maknisa. So we'll say, here's an interesting case. So if the 14th falls out on Shabbos, what are we going to do? Villages and unwalled cities will push their reading back to Thursday. Now the logic behind this seems to be as follows. Once the unwalled cities already cannot read on their date on the 14th, so instead of going ahead and pushing unwalled cities back to Friday, which will be the 13th, and villages to the 12th, which will be Thursday, we might as well, once already unwalled cities are not reading on their natural date, we might as well group everyone together. If you're being delayed, let's group you together. So in that case, where the 14th falls out on Shabbos, we'll go ahead and we'll push unwalled cities and villages back to the Yom HaKnisa, back to Thursday. We'll kefas choma, but obviously walled cities, l'machar. We'll read on Sunday, which is the 15th. Beautiful. Chalios achra Shabbos. So we'll say, what happens if the 14th falls out on a Sunday? In this case, we'll say, here we go. Kfarim makdimin liyom haknisa. Ultimately, again, so we'll say, in this case over here, villages will read on Thursday. Now we'll say, here you go, this is a very important case. Why? If villages are reading on Thursday, what date is that? That's the 11th. So here you have the illustration of the earliest possible date to read Megillah. That'll come up in a situation where halacha lamaisa, the 14th falls out on a Sunday, will allow villages to push back ultimately to the previous Thursday, which is the 11th. So kfar makdim yom haknisa, va'ayoros gidolos korim bo bayom. Large unwalled cities will read that day on Sunday the 14th. Umu kefes choma l'machar. And ultimately, again, walled cities will read the next day, which is the 15th. So I will say, by the way, I want to point out, it's rare that you see a Mishnah like this, with so much incredible detail. And remember, again, the Mishnah pretty much illustrated every single possible case so as to give us the range between the 11th and ultimately, again, the 15th. So no earlier than so here's what we have. The range from Megillah is from 11 to the 15th, no earlier than the 11th, no later than the 15th. That earliest date comes up in a situation where the 14th falls out on Sunday. Remember, walled cities always on the 15th. Only exception to walled cities on the 15th is when? When the 15th falls out on Shabbos, then they'll advance their reading to the 14th. Unwalled large cities will read on the 14th, again, unless, of course, it falls out on Shabbos. And villages always have the right to advance to the previous Yom HaKnisa, to the previous entry day, called entry day, market day. They have the ability to advance. Also, I just mentioned something interesting. He's being careful. All right. Also, I'll tell you something very interesting. Actually, it struck me that the Mishnah uses the lashon over here of Megillah Nikreis, tells you all the dates. Lo pachos velo yoser. Lo pachos velo yoser. Pachos means what? Less, and yoser means more. The truth is, if you were writing the Mishnah, how would you write it? Lo what? Lo mukdam velo mu'uchar. Not any earlier and not any later. What do you mean pachos and yoser, less and more? So I saw a beautiful idea by the tzaddik Rabbi Yitzchak Avarki. So listen to this. This is incredible. So we're going to see later on, by the way, that part of the beauty and part of the power of Purim is that Purim is very much like Shavuos. That Purim, there was a Kabbalah Satorah. There was a reacceptance of Torah. But whereas Har Sinai really is much more focused on a Kabbalah Satorah of Torah Shebichsav, right? An acceptance of Torah of the written law. Purim is a kimu v'kiblu, is a reacceptance also ultimately again of Torah Shebal Peh. That's one aspect. And also, whereas Har Sinai was Kaf Aleim Har Kigigis, there was a certain element of compulsion with Kabbalah Torah, with the Torah acceptance of Torah. Purim is a willing acceptance of Torah. So Rabbi Yitzchak Avarki says something so beautiful. He says, therefore, because Purim is also an element of Kabbalah Torah, of acceptance of Torah, he says, therefore, just like when we received the Torah at Har Sinai, there were Shlosha Simei Hagbala. There were 3 days of preparation, right? That's how Matan Torah worked. So the Rebbe says, by Purim we have the same thing. Purim is really the 14th of Adar, 14/15th. So when's the earliest time you could read the Megillah? The 11th. 11, 12, 13. So the Rebbe says, representing the Shlosh Simei Hagbala, the 3 days of preparation, ultimately again for Purim. So I was thinking about it. If you view 11, 12, and 13 as the Shlosh Simei Hagbala, the days of preparation, the lashon of lo muktam and lo mu'uchar is very incredible. Because what does it mean, lo muktam? Sirbo says an incredible Musar Haskell. Lo muktam means, at the end of the day, in order to be successful in anything in life, you have to prepare. You have to prepare, right? We know this. We'll say, think about this. Even just in the morning, right? A person comes to shir. So the truth is, everyone knows. Like, if I'm running late and I just kind of come in, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's hard. It's someone told me. I won't mention them. Someone told me, we really have to restart Sidkas Tzaddik, right, in the morning. I said, oh, it's so beautiful. So one was like, no, I don't pay attention at all. But I need those 10 minutes to get myself focused. I'm like, thank you for validating my work. I really appreciate that. It's beautiful, right? And I'm sure Tzaddik is mamish dancing in Gan Eden over your words, right? But there's something to be said for that. In other words, that you have to prepare. You have to prepare. If any time in life, it's no different. If you have a big meeting and you just roll into the meeting, chances are you're not going to be as successful as if you prepared. That's the whole sort of Shloshe Simei Hagbala. A person needs preparation for Kabbalah Satorah. So the lashon of lo muktam is, you can't do something any earlier if it's not preceded by preparation. Right? In other words, I want to accomplish something. Lo muktam. You can't do it any earlier than really without 3 days of preparation. You need Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel. You want to be successful in life, a person needs preparation. Lo muktam. Can't do it any earlier than without preparation. However, lo mu'uchar. Tzvi say the challenge in life is there are people who spend their lives preparing. They're always preparing, right? I'm always planning. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. The most incredible plans. Only one problem. A failure to launch. No execution. I just never end up carrying through. That's lo mu'uchar. You can't keep planning until it gets too late either. So the Mishnah is teaching us an incredible Musar Haskell. If you view Purim as another Kabbalah Satorah, if you view Purim as another Har Sinai, then at the end of the day, it has 3 days of Agbalah. Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel are the days of preparation, just like by Har Sinai. Below Muktam, you can't accomplish anything too early without proper preparation. Below Mu'uchar, but at the end of the day, if you spend your whole life planning and never executing, that's a failure as well. Can't do things in life too early without preparation, but you can't do things in life too late either, constantly preparing and never executing. Rabbi Yitzchak Avarki on the Mishnah, incredible. Rabbi say, says the Gemara, Megillah nikreis b'Yud Minala. So we'll say, how do you know that Megillah can be read on the 11th? From where do we know this? So the Gemara says, Minalon ki debainol memar kaman. So we'll say, from where? We say later on. What do we say later on? Chachamim mekilu ala kfarim lios makdim liyamaknisa I mentioned this before when we were reading Rashi. This is really interesting because the Gemara understands that the reason the villages are permitted to go ahead and advance their reading is why? In order that on Purim itself they are free to provide food and staples for the Purim Suda for their brothers and sisters in the cities. This is different than what we saw in the Mishnah, right? Rashi in the Mishnah seems to indicate that halacha l'maisa, the reason they're allowed to advance their reading is why? Because often they don't have a Baal Koreh. See, what the Gemara is highlighting over here is that's fine, you don't have a Baal Koreh, that's fine. Why can't they just go into the large cities on Purim itself? In other words, why does the absence of a Baal Koreh, right, preclude them from celebrating Purim on the 14th? Just go into the large cities. To which the Gemara now explains because Chazal actually understood that the villages provided a pivotal service for Purim celebration for the larger cities. They provided food and water. They provide for food and drink to the larger cities for their Purim celebration. Therefore, again, Chazal allowed them to fulfill Mikra Megillah at an earlier time. Which I will say, think about that for just a moment. So the villagers should fulfill Mikra Megillah at an earlier time in order to provide for the needs of the larger cities. So you see from here that what? Sometimes the greatest actualization of your personalistic ruchnius is not in what you do for yourself, but it's in what you do for others. So the villagers, Chazal said, you read Megillah earlier. This way you could help facilitate the Purim celebration of the people in the larger cities. So I should have a Bidi Eved Mikra Megillah in order to help someone else with their Purim Suda? And the answer is, it's not Bidi Eved when you're helping someone else. So we will allow the villagers to read early in order to facilitate the Purim celebration of the cities. Absolutely incredible. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, so we're asking a different question. I'm not asking like this svara, the logic of why the villages are allowed to move their reading up. What I want to know is as follows. All of these days were instituted by Chazal. The Gemara says, "Asu Rabbana va'akri takanda takinu ansheikines sagdola." So let's remember again. So I'm sorry. Dik sagdaitcha ansheikines sagdola yudal v'tesvav tikun. Asu Rabbana va'akri takanda takinu ansheikines sagdola. So we'll say, here's what we're worried about. You see, in the Megillah, what we're going to see is we only find 2 dates for the celebration of Purim. What are the 2 dates? Yudal and Tesvav. What we're asking is, where did Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, and Yud Gimel come from? Now, I understand that they are takanas Chazal. Chazal must have instituted them. But again, how could Chazal institute something which would potentially upend something that a previous rabbinic bani legislated? After all, v'hatnan, ein bezin yachal levatal divrei bezin chavero, ela imkin gadol mimeno bechachma u'beminyan. Yet, we know that halacha l'maisa, one rabbinic body cannot uproot the legislation of our previous rabbinic body unless that second rabbinic body is greater in number and wisdom. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Elapshita, kulu anshe knesses hagedola takinu heicha. Rabbi will say, here's our question. It must be that from the beginning of the institution of the Yom Tov of Purim, it was instituted right from the beginning that you could read the Megillah, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Daled, Tesvav. Now, Yud Daled and Tesvav are in the Megillah. Where do we see Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, and Yud Gimel alluded to in the Megillah? Well, so here we go. Amar Sham R Avraham Menachem Amar Kra. Pasuk says, Lekayim es yemei Purim ha'ela bizmanehem. To go ahead and literally uphold the days of this Purim, bizmanehem, in their times, plural. Zmanim harbe tiknu lahem. Shows you, Zmanem teaches you that what? Chazal instituted many days for the reading of the Megillah. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. Zmanehem haimi boile legufei. Zmanehem teaches me that what? The 14th and 15th. Right? So that's what Zmanehem teaches me. Right? Zmanehem teaches me the 2 Iker days. Imkain lemakra zman. If that's the case, the pasuk had just said zman. My zmanehem. Ultimately, again, what is zmanehem? That plural, zmanim tuva. It means there are many days for the reading of the Megillah. What the Gemara is suggesting over here is that from the word zmanehem, from that word itself, I learn Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Daled, Tesvav. But 1 second, zmanehem teaches me something else. Zmano shalzeh, lo kizmano shalzeh. Both say Zmanehem teaches me, both say, see, you would have thought like this. Maybe, halacha l'maisa, the Megillah says you could read Megillah on your Dalet and Tesvav. And perhaps you could choose to read it on whichever day you want. To which the Gemara says, Zmanehem teaches me, Zmano shazeh lo kizmano shazeh. The date of this place is not like the date of that place. In other words, each place, each location, or each type of location has its own unique date. Imkain lemakra zmanom. If that's the case, the pasuk could have written it in shorter hand. Zmanom. My zmanehem. What's zmanehem? Shamas mina kulu. It teaches me all of these things. Rabbi say what it teaches me is numbers. So zmanehem is a catch-all phrase or catch-all word that teaches me everything. Number one, that there are multiple dates, right? From Yud Aleph through Tesvav. Number two, that you can't read on any date you want. Different places are assigned different dates. Says the Gemara, Ra'ema Zmanim Tuva. So maybe it includes more dates. Maybe it's not just Yud Aleph, right? Maybe you could even start reading earlier. To which the Gemara says, Zmanehem Dumya Dizmanam. No, the word Zmanehem is just like Zmanam. How so? Mazmanam Trey. Just like the word Zmanom includes two dates, Yud Dalet and Tesvav. So the Gemara says, Af Zmanehem Trey. So too, again, Zmanehem comes to include two more dates. Okay, so two more dates. If that's the case, Ve'ema Trey Sar Utlesar. Maybe that only comes to tell me that I can read the Megillah on the 12th and the 13th. I still don't know about the 11th. To which the Gemara says, no. I don't need a drasha for the 13th. Why not? Kedamra Shomar Yitzchak Yud Gimel Zman Kihila Lakolhi V'lo Tzarech L'Rabuye. Hachanami Yud Gimel Zman Kihila Lakolhi V'lo Tzarech L'Rabuye. But say, I don't need a drasha to teach me that Megillah could be read on the 13th. Why not? The 13th is Zman Kihila Lakol. Well, see, if you take a look at Rashi on the left-hand side, 3 lines down, Rashi says, Zman Kihila Lakoli Hakol Nikalu Lihinoke Me'ayvehem Bein B'Shushan Bein B'Sharma Komos Kimo Shekasu B'Sefer Hilchach Lo Tzarich Kra L'Rabuye Shehei Roi L'Kriya De'ikr Hanes Bo Haya. Rabbi say the 13th of Adar was a day in which everyone was engaged in war. Everyone was fighting back against the enemies of the Jewish people. I don't need a pasuk to teach me that halacha l'maisa you could read Megillah on the 13th. Why? Now Rashi says something amazing. Because Rashi says the 13th, Iker Hanes Haya Bo. The primary miracle of Purim happened on the 13th, which I both say is incredible. Right? You see, I would have not thought like that. I would have thought the Iker Nes happened when? On the 14th and the 15th, and they celebrated the victory. No. We'll say, what a Musar Haskell. The Iker Nes happened on the day of the battle. Right? Because the Iker Nes of life is the ability to engage in the battles of life. That's the greatest miracle. When you find the courage to get up and fight. When you find the courage to go out and push back against your circumstances. When you find the courage to go out and fight back against your enemies, be they external or internal, that's the Iker Hanes. So it was fascinating. So the Gemara says over here, I don't need a pasuk to teach me that I could go ahead and read the Megillah on the 13th. That's obvious. That's obvious. So I'll say what it turns out over here is as follows. Listen to this incredible idea. So the Megillah itself tells me that there's a celebration on the 14th, celebration on the 15th. I don't need the Megillah to tell me that there's that I can read the Megillah on the 13th, because that's obvious. That's the Ikar Hanes. That was the day of the Milchama. And such a Musar Haskell, the Ikar Hanes is on the day when we found the courage to fight back. Because the greatest Nes in life is when you find the courage to fight back against the circumstances which are constraining you. If that's the case now, Zmanehem teaches me 2 more dates. And what are the 2 more dates Zmanehem teaches me? 11 and 12. Excellent. Yud Aleph and Yud Beis. So say, so now I have it. Beautiful. Now I have it. Yud Aleph, Yud Beis. Learn that from Zmanehem. Yud Gimel doesn't need a pasuk because it's the Ikar Hanes. Yud Dalet and Tesvav are explicitly written in the Megillah. Beautiful. I ve'ema shisar v'shivsar. But maybe Zmanehem will say, see, we're presupposing that Zmanehem is teaching me to add on additional dates on the front end. Maybe Zmanehem is teaching me to add on dates on the back end. Right? And maybe it's coming to teach me to add on dates the 16th and the 17th, To which the Gemara says v'lo yavar, because the pasuk in the Megillah says v'lo yavar. Ultimately, again, the celebration of Purim will not go ahead and pass these days. V'lo yavar will not go past these days. These days being that the 15th is the official last day of celebration for Purim. Beautiful. Says the Gemara. So we'll say that's the first way. That's Rav Shman bar Abba, and then Rabbi Yochanan, that everything is learned out from Zmanehem. Beautiful. Second opinion. Rosh Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Kra Ki Yomim Asher Nacho B'Ama Yehudim. So we'll say the pasuk says like the days in which the Jews rested. Yomim Ki Yomim. Now we'll say, now remember again, this is at the end of the Megillah. The pasuk that we're quoting over here, Ka Yomim Asher Nachu B'Ama Yehudim B'Ayveyem. So we'll say like the days that the Jews rested from their enemies, which again refer to what? Yudalid and Tesvav. So the Gemara said, listen to this. So Ka Yomim Asher Nachu B'Ama Yehudim Yomim Ki Yomim means that there are additional days like those days. What are the additional days like those days? L'rabos Yud Aleph Yud Beis, that comes to include 2 more days, 11th and 12th. I ve'ema treisar tleisar. Say it's not 11 and 12, but what? 12 and 13. Once again, Amr Shem and Yitzchak. Yud Gimel Zman Ki L'Koli V'lo Tzarech L'Rabuye. Once again, I will say, everyone's agreeing, I don't need a pasuk to include the 13th of Adar. Why not? 13th of Adar is the Ikar Hanes, what we call the Yom Kihila L'Kol, was the day of war. Therefore, it's automatically included that you could read Megillah on the 13th. Therefore, Yomim will come to include 2 more days, 11 and 12. I says the Gemara. So we'll say this is a second opinion. So Shlomo bar Nachmani says, it's Rabbi Shlomo bar Nachmani, Yomim. Ki Yomim, so Ki Yomim means there are additional days. So we'll say we have 2 different opinions. Rav Shman bar Abba, Zmanehem, Rav Shlomo bar Nachmani, Yomim. Now, again, amazingly enough, everyone's agreeing on the result. There's just a machlokis in terms of the drasha. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Rav Shlomo bar Nachmani, my time Elomar Zmanehem. So why doesn't Rav Shlomo bar Nachmani, why doesn't he agree with the drasha of Zmanehem? Zmanehem lo mashmalei, because he just doesn't agree with this type of drasha. Rav Shlomo bar Abba, my time Elo Amar Ki Yomim. Why doesn't he learn that from Ki Yomim? Amar Lacha Hahula Doros Hudichsiv. Oh, so we'll say this is incredible, because ultimately Rav Shlomo bar Abba will say that Ki Yomim is actually the source for the future celebration of Purim. That teaches me that Purim was not just an episodic celebration, but rather, again, it is an obligation to celebrate it for all future generations as well. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Baruch Yochanan, Sudiv Rabbi Akiva. Right? So both says, listen to this. Now we're jumping. So both says, so therefore we have two sources that teach us the additional days. Beautiful. Comes along Rabba Bar Chanan Rabbi Yochanan, Zu Divrei Rabbi Akiva Stimsoi, the Darish Zman Zmanam Zmanehem. Ava Chachamim Omrim Ein Korin Osa Ela Bizmana. So both say, listen to this. Comes along Rabbi Chanan, he says, our Mishnah reflects the view of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva holds that there are additional days for Megillah reading, namely 11, 12, and 13. But the Chachamim hold, no, there are only 2 dates for Megillah reading. What are the 2 dates? The 2 dates written in the Megillah, Yudalid and Tesvav. I'm Rabbi Yehuda. So both say that this is incredible. Ey Masai, when is this true? That there are additional dates for reading of the Megillah? This is incredible. Bizman Shashanim Kitiknon, V'Yisrael Shuruyin Alad Masan. They both said the only time that there are additional dates for the reading of the Megillah is ultimately, again, when Beis Din declares the new month and Klal Yisrael is living in Eretz Yisrael. However, Aval Bizman Hazeh, Ho'elu Mistaklin Ba, they both say, but today we don't do these additional dates. They both say, why not? This is incredible. Today, when it says today, the Gemara says today, presently, and the Gemara is present, people often calculated Pesach, how? Based on Purim. Based on Purim, right? Observe Pesach, observe Purim, count 15 days, that's the end of Adar, count another 15 days, that's Pesach. Here's the problem, says the Gemara. If you therefore allow for additional days, 11, 12, 13, what's going to end up happening? People are going to get messed up with the date of Purim. So we'll say this is an incredible halacha, and this is indeed, we don't have time now, but this is indeed how the Rambam paskins, that these additional dates, 11, 12, and 13, only apply when there's organized Jewish community. An organized Jewish community, as defined, there's a Beis Din in place. Beis Din is in charge of the calendar. Am Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, again, the shluch and the messengers get where they're supposed to get going. But in a situation of diaspora, we no longer have 11, 12, and 13. I will say that's why the Seven Rabbim Paskins, that's why the halachos of 11, 12, and 13 do not appear in Shulchan Aruch. They appear in the Gemara, but they do not appear in Shulchan Aruch. Incredible. So Rabbi Yehuda Libudeman. Who does Rabbi Yehuda hold like? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, afilu bizman hazeh. If he holds like Rabbi Akiva, then the truth is you should be able to do 11, 12, and 13 even presently. So the Gemara says, Ela lav aliba d'Rabbanon, ubizman shashanim kitiknon, v'yisrael shuruyin alad masan, miha karinon. Ultimately, again, I will say, but rather he must reflect the view of the Rabbanon, and therefore, even according to the Rabbanon, when Beis Din is there, and when Am Yisrael is dwelling in Eretz Yisrael, there should be the additional dates, to which the Gemara says, you're right, tiyufta, to Rabbi Yochanan tiyufta. Rabbi said this reflects the view of Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said that according to the Rabbanon, right, you never have a right to read on dates, additional dates other than 14 and 15. We've just proven that that is incorrect. Good. Others say, Rabbi Yochanan, Zudiv Rabbi Akiva stimsoi. Ava Chachamim, or the Chachamim say, Bizman hazeh, hoel u'mistaklin ba, ein korin osa ella bizmana. So Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara wants to suggest, would hold that you could always read on the 11th, 12th, and 13th, even when there is no organized Beis Din, even when Am Yisrael is not living in Eretz Yisrael. The Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim say no, the institution of reading Megillah on 11, 12, and 13 is only when there's an organized Beis Din, right? And only ultimately when the Shluchim could reach the different pockets of Am Yisrael. But in the absence of that, you can't read the Megillah on the additional dates, because otherwise people are going to get messed up regarding Pesach. That supports Rabbi Yehuda Masai. Rabbi Yehuda says, when can you read the Megillah on the 11th, 12th, and 13th? Bizman shashanim kitiknon v'Yisrael sharuyin alad masan. Aval bizman hazeh, but presently, hol u'mistaklin ba, which means since people look at the Megillah to determine when they're going to celebrate Pesach, ein korin osa ela bizmana, you can only read it on the 14th and the 15th. Ravashi, Kashile Rabbi Yehuda. So also according to Ravashi, he had a contradiction about the positions of Rabbi Yehuda between the Brisa and the Mishnah. Umokim lo lebraisa Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, and he established, therefore, again, in order to resolve the contradiction, he established the Brisa like Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Umiyamar Rabbi Yehuda bizmana zehom mistakal ba'in koronos al bizmana. Did Rabbi Yehuda really say that? That since today people count off from the reading of the Megillah till Pesach, therefore we can't really read it on the 11th, 12th, and 13th. Is that true? Or minhi, but we learned, Rabbi Yehuda, e masai, makom shenichnas b'sheni v'chamishi. But Rabbi Yehuda said, when could villages advance their reading to the 11th, 12th, and 13th? That's only villages that normally go into the larger cities on Mondays and Thursdays. But Rabbi said, let's say you have a village where they never enter in on Mondays and Thursdays. In that case, Rabbi say, villages that don't go in on Mondays and Thursdays can only read it in their appointed time. What's the appointed time of villages? What's the appointed time? The 14th. So the Gemara says, the inference from this is that villages that do go into the larger cities on Mondays and Thursdays can advance their reading even presently. So I just want to point out, just so you understand the machlokis that's happening over here. Let's assume for a moment, right? So step number one in this whole thing was, how do we know that you could read the Megillah on additional dates other than the 14th and 15th, right? So that we had a machlokis. Either we darshan zmanehem or kiyamim. Fine, gives us additional dates. I also know that I don't need a special drasha for the 13th. Everyone agrees that the 13th is the Ikar Anes, therefore you can go ahead and read on that date. So therefore the drasha gives me dates 11 and 12. Now comes along the Gemara and says, by the way, this idea of reading the Megillah 11, 12, 13 only applies when there is organized Jewish community. Beis Din declaring the new month, Beis Din dispatching shluchim to tell everybody when Pesach is, because in the absence of that, we can't read on earlier dates. Why? It's going to be a disaster. Because people look to the Megillah and count off from the Megillah to Pesach. And if you're reading on earlier dates, people will end up messing up the date of Pesach. That's the Sabosai. Now that point seems to be subject to machlokes as well. So the Gemara says, Mukimo lebraisek Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, umishum dekashi Rabbi Yehuda, Mukil l'braisek Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, and because again we have a contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda's shitas, we're going to establish a braisek Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Rashi shmiele di iked detani leik Rabbi Yehuda, viked detani leik Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. So we'll say Rashi here like this: there are those who set it up like Rabbi Yehuda, and there are those who set it up like Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. Umidikasheli Rabbi Yehuda ad Rabbi Yehuda, but since you had a contradiction between the two positions of Rabbi Yehuda, Amar man detani ki Rabbi Yehuda lav dafka, man detani li Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda dafka. So Rav Ashi was of the opinion that because there's a contradiction between the positions of Rabbi Yehuda, it must have been that the one who attributed to Rabbi Yehuda was not precise in his words, but the one who attributed to Rabbi Yehuda was precise in his words. So we'll say we'll have to stop here for today. Don't worry. Tomorrow we're going to start off at 5:45. So no tzid kasas atzadik to catch yourself up. Hey, so I'll say we will catch up in Meretz Hashem. But I will say I just want to point out what we're ending off with. So we know what we know. 11 through 15 are the dates for Megillah. Walled cities have their dates. Unwalled cities have their dates. Kfarim have the ability to advance their readings, right? Two different drashas, Zmanihem, Kiyamim. Now, what we end off over here is as follows. Halacha l'maisa, I'll just give you the Rambam. Halacha l'maisa, this ability of villages to advance their readings the ability to advance readings to 11, 12, and 13, the Rambam Paskins is only when there is an organized Beis Din and Klal Yisrael is in Eretz Yisrael. Now, presently, we no longer have the ability to read on 11, 12, and 13 in a systematic way. Because halacha l'maisa nafik minei churva. It could be a terrible confusion, because people count off from Purim to Pesach. That's how the Rambam paskins. That's why you won't find this 11, 12, 13 ultimately again mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. Moshe, we'll pick up here tomorrow. Mazel tov on the new haskala. Incredible journey ahead of us. It's just a lobotomist and gula came across this morning.